When did I come to SACS? Well, we left the UK in, Christ, I don't know, 63, 64. I started off in standard three, where I almost immediately got meningitis and then was dragged off to a hospital for the rest of the year. So I didn't come back until standard four. And then I got, well, I suppose with everybody, I got stuck with everybody, with Adam Glasser and Paddy Smuts and Nige and all those people for the next umpteen years, and until standard nine, where I was never a very good student, as I possibly some people might remember, and I failed standard nine with 39.4%, if I remember correctly, which, as you must know, is 1/10% short of a pass. And after another year's intensive work, the following year at standard nine again, which is indeed the year that I joined your class, I managed to pass with 39.6%. So there you have definite progress in my education there. And sadly, I think that my father was sent back to the UK. He worked for Shell, and they all buggered off and they left me behind. And that's when I ended up as a boarder for the second time in my life at Rosedale. Sorry, too much Dutch here. Rosedale. Yeah, exciting times. Woodland was the head prefect in the boarding house and left us with some interesting impressions. We used to leave the hostel late at night on occasion without permission and come back in the early hours of the morning. What do I remember specifically? I think Perry Norgob falling in through the window when he was the first back up the drain pipe and waking up everyone between Rosedale and Musenberg, and having to hide in the hydrangeas in front of Rosedale when Whiteford, having been aroused by the noise, came past with a torch which he shone into the bushes, and he shone it directly into my face and moved on. And I learned, I think, from that experience that you can look for someone in a bush at night with a torch and you won't see them, because unless they're moving or wearing something fluorescent, you're just not going to see them. I don't think this was intentional on the boss's side to forgive and forget. Anyway, and you mentioned John Ince. And John, I would never have passed matric without John Ince. I have always relied on the kindness of strangers. And John lent me his apartment, and indeed his parking lot under his flat, where I used to park my Mini. So when we did get out at night, we could go somewhere. But he took me back. He taught me history. He gave me everything I needed to finally actually get my university pass in matric. So there were some very good people there who really did their best to make a difference to our lives, and did. And Jesus, if it hadn't been the case, then God knows what would have happened to me then. My life would have taken a very different course. Got into UCT very enormously unsuccessfully. Well, I don't know. I mean, I love Louis Knutzer, a wonderful guy. A special relation, but I don't know. But a number of teachers used to come up to the house where my parents lived, Hoogeind, and they would swim and party and have a glass of beer. Generally, I mean, behaved as impeccable gentlemen. There were occasions that I and my dormitory would arrive at Hoogeind 11:30 at night to find that we would not be able to enter the premises because there were a number of our teachers who would not be very pleased to see us, and would have to go and amuse ourselves somewhere else. Which, incidentally, remembering before I joined your year, we used to go to Forries a few times, and same story again. We would bump into a number of our teachers who were not very pleased to find their students in the same bar. Which is probably not possible anymore. It certainly wouldn't be in this country, where if you haven't reached drinking age, you would be frowned upon or even asked to leave the premises. But I have a special relationship. No, Yes, because he helped me so tremendously, and he helped a number of other people. The man was so dedicated and made such a difference. I think probably quite a number of people's lives in a very, very positive way. To achieve things which otherwise simply would not have happened. I don't know. They were just there. I suppose my mother was like to host people like that. I'm not sure it had a lot to do with my education. My brother used to get very upset because my mother would arrive at PTA meetings barefoot, and simply she would go and she would invite them all to come up for a glass of wine and then leave without having asked about any of our academic achievements. So there was a strong social relationship between some of the teachers and basically my mother. I think my father was a lot less sociable than my mother was. And Louis Knutzer ended up also having his marriage after party at our house. Fabulous, great, when the saints, etc., etc. Louis, everybody knows Louis. But I mean, a special relationship. There was never any thought of having been academically subjected to any kind of preference because of the friendship that they had with my mother. Except, of course, the intense extra lessons that John Ince gave me and enabled me probably to actually get my matric ever at all. So, but I mean, that was his job, and he did it very well. And fabulous man, one in a million. Well, the second time I had the car, because I'd failed, I was 18 when I matriculated, so I had a motor car license. But before that, then Brimacum used to arrive on his rather strange Italian Moto Guzzi three-wheeler, and we would all pile onto that and drive off into the night. Very, very strange thing. And then I'm told, thinking of Brimacum's Moto Guzzi, that he used to drive it to school without any legality whatsoever and never got stopped. But once he was in front of the school before he went home, and everyone piled onto the back of it, including Terry de Jong. I remember he was sitting next to me on the back. And Errol, that's it, Errol thought, I'm going to drive this thing with a dozen people on the back, and went roaring down in front of the school. Now, Errol was very good in a two-wheeler, but he'd never driven a three-wheeler. So when he leaned into the corner to try and go up towards the junior school, nothing happened. The thing simply continued in the same direction, hit the curb, took off, and landed in the junior school rugby field without Errol, who had stayed behind at the top of the bank. And I have this very strong memory of Terry de Jong floating in midair with this look of horror on his face as we descended very uncomfortably onto the junior school rugby fields, where indeed the Moto Guzzi broke into several component parts, and yet was still drivable. And Brimacum drove off on it. Indeed, Errol stood at the top, looking a bit sheepish. He had damaged his reputation of being such a motorcycle monster. But okay. And I because I was right at the back, I didn't actually go down the bank as Terry de Jong did, and 9 other people. So, and this is the point I was making. I was told later that Whiteford, while we were roaring down the hill, walked out of the front door under the pillars and saw this happening, and saw this Moto Guzzi hit the curb and take off into the sky with people flying around, and stood for a few seconds, then turned around and walked back inside, which I thought was very, very Whiteford thing to do. I don't know if it's true, of course, because I was hanging on for dear life at that stage. Huh? So that's a very strong memory I have of being at school.
I remember I was watching that.
Yeah, it was a very odd experience.
Sorry.
I have another vehicular memory, because again, because I was 18 and I used to drive to school in my Mini, that I'd parked and it was after school and I was about to drive off, and there were a couple of bully boys whose names I can't remember. They were a year or 2 years below us, and they thought they were very special. And we did not like each other very much. So when I got into the car, the 4 or 5 of them gathered round and they picked up the back of the car so the wheels wouldn't touch the ground. And they thought it was a tremendous joke. Of course, lack of education, they didn't know a Mini has a front wheel drive. So picking up the back of the car did not stop me driving off quite rapidly, and they all fell on their faces. That's a moment of great pleasure of my memories of SACS. These guys falling on their faces because obviously they couldn't hold the Mini back. Well, I have a lot of memories. I have memories of you and Boxall and Josie and someone also very large in the Mini, whizzing round a corner and going down. Jesus, what street was it? Where Mike's store used to live. Big
Palmboom?
Palmboom Road. Yeah, we went roaring down there at a horrendous rate. Jesus. No, I don't even want to remember that anymore. Another one, we probably you also in the car, and Josie and Graham, at the traffic lights crossing, geez, what was the main road called? It wasn't at the bottom, Edinburgh Drive, and went Paradise Road, then headed onto the
Duval Drive.
Yeah, anyway, up Newlands Avenue. That was it, at the traffic lights there. And we were all sitting in my Mini, and this guy in some horrendous sports car pulled up next to us, and he floored, gave it a few revs, so his exhaust went bada 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 bada. And I had an old motorcycle exhaust under the Mini, and we all, after a short discussion, we all looked very, very serious, and we all turned our faces to look at this guy. And I revved my car, which made incredible noise, bum 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 bum, and flames came out the back. And this guy got really excited, thinking, "Oh, we're going to race these guys." And again, you might remember this, that I'd stripped my gearbox, so I didn't have a first gear or a reverse. So when the traffic lights went green and this guy screaming off with smoking tires, and the Mini went, and then sort of potted away at one step at a time. And we all having looked really, really serious from, we're gonna really drop you behind. I just burst out in laughing. That was a very cool memory as well.
You spoke
Yes,
about...
I won't remind you of the guy in the Jaguar when yes, that's got nothing to do with school. So you can tell that story if you want to. Do you remember driving down the pier at Musenberg? You didn't, did you? Now you do.
Tell the story.
Well, we drove. I don't know. We drove down the pier of Musenberg in the Mini in the middle of the night. With you again in the car next to me. You see, you must have been a tremendously bad influence on me, Andrew. I was just this kid, innocent as anything, and all these terrible things, the pedestrian bridge, the Musenberg, and all these racing down Edinburgh Drive. You were the person with me every single time. The guy in the Jaguar, you were there. I think you must have terrible influence on my life, really. I'm probably lucky to have made it. Well, Josie was a really good friend of mine, and we used to burn around on our bikes. And I was on the back of his bike. He was taking me back to boarding school one day when his front tire blew out, and Jesus, I mean, we went across the road at 60, 70 kilometers an hour. And I arrived back at Rosedale in tatters and bleeding. And I forget which master it was who said, "What happened to you, Walker?" And I said, "I fell down the bank, sir, clothes in pieces and bleeding." And I'm not sure they wanted to pursue what might have been indiscretions on our part, really.
Because you and Josie...
But yeah, Josie, the last time I saw him was a few months before he died. I mean, I think we all knew he was not going to last much longer. And I'd come across, I think, from China, and I went to visit him at his house with Angela, and it was rough, I mean, I knew I'd never see him again because I didn't get back to South Africa that often, and he just obviously wasn't going to make it. He knew he wasn't going to make it. We never discussed it, but hard when there's no good end. Yeah. Well, I had a Zundup, which was it's one of the fastest 50 cc's you can get, except in fact for the Kreidler, which I still think holds the world record for 50 cc speed, 220 something kilometers an hour for a 50 cc bike, which is just staggering. But of course, Josie was twice my weight. So if you evened it up, he had a faster bike, but I was half the mass, and my physics is pretty good. Yours was really shit, I remember that. You will know F equals MA, therefore the M, if the A equals F over M, is working in my favor when it came to Josie. Yeah, big guy, Josie. Yeah, no, those were great years. I really enjoyed those bikes. I think there's a limit to what I can say about Woodland and his how nice he was as a head prefect at Rosedale. He was not someone who bunked out. No, not with us anyway. He might have bunked out on his own. I don't know. He certainly had the responsibility as head prefect, so maybe he behaved really decently. I have no idea.
Half of the stuff that you got up to, you would have been banned forever. But
well, I think we just established that you were always present at anything which went terribly wrong.
You basically everything your whole household, a lot of your identity was just sort of shipped away, and then there you were left on your own. I wondered, how that felt. I mean, did you feel abandoned?
At the time, nothing really. I think in retrospect, years later, I rather had the feeling I never left home. Home left me. So I've kind of missed out on a few experiences that most humans have. I mean, Jesus, do you remember when you left home and you moved a kilometer away, and your mother and Mary Ann are in tears in the streets, and you're waving goodbye from your car, and you're like you were 10 minutes away. That was your moving home. And I sort of got up one morning and there was nobody there anymore. And I ended up in Rosedale, and yeah, there wasn't really anywhere to go. Like in the longer holidays and things where everyone went back to their houses. Well, I didn't. In fact, I used to come and stay with you. So no, I didn't feel abandoned. I just feel now I missed out on the experience of leaving home and having my sibling and parents waving in tears as I drove off into the sunset. That just never happened. I suppose people have that. You leave home. I didn't. No, I always assumed people went to Abbott's and Cape Tech and those places because they couldn't make it at SACS. And it was easier to make it at those places. And I never thought the teachers particularly resented it because, you're going from a class of 35 to a class of, what was it, 19, you say? Hey, that's quite an improvement. SACS has very high levels. And, if you look at the results from SACS students generally, it's one of the best schools, I imagine, in the country. It's not number one, but it's just going to be not far behind. I was just a hopeless student. My head was not there. It took several more years to get to a mental state where I could actually study properly and realize the consequences. I mean, let's face it, eventually I got a degree in electrical engineering, which is pretty heavy going, It's the pass rate even in the Netherlands is below 10%. So, but it's after 2 years at UCT, which I failed, a year at the Central London Poly, which I failed. Age, I was old enough and settled enough at a given moment to apply myself to studying properly. And at SACS, that simply wasn't the case. I still remember when I failed Standard 9, skip ahead to matric. When I got my matric, I got every single grade you could get, from an A+ to a double F and all the way down, which averaged out as a university pass. So I was a shit student, definitely. My head wasn't there. Well, I remember teaching some very basic shit, which is all you need to pass physics, to be honest. I mean, Mark Witston got me through maths. I would never have got an engineering degree if it wasn't for Mark Witston. He gave me extra lessons in maths at school and possibly later, and that meant by the time I started for the third time my engineering degree, I actually had a bit of understanding what calculus was about. I have always relied on the kindness of strangers. and Baquet wasn't a stranger, but he Witston, Ince, I mean, these are people who made it possible for me to actually eventually get somewhere in the world of education. And I can probably name a few more. There was in the Polytechnic here in the Netherlands, there were people who, again, I went to their houses. They gave me extra lessons. I'm a shit student, I know that. But I started with 100 students in my first year here. And at the end of the first year, 2 of us passed. At the end of the second year, I was the only one. And, and I'm a crap student. So, work it out from there. I don't know. Anyway,
Lovely,
these are people
lovely
who
thing.
have been huge influence on my life and probably don't even know it, you know. And sadly, I mean, God, he really made a difference to my upbringing. Did he know? I don't know. Maybe he was quite insightful in many ways. Terrible skier. I do remember. I think I can tell this without too much embarrassment that he and I and my mother were staying in a hotel in France on a ski resort, and he and I were sharing a room. There's two things I remember. One was that one night I stayed at the next resort and couldn't get back because I'd been drinking with some other people, and it was too cold and too dangerous to get back from that building to the building I was staying. Inns phoned my mother at 7 a.m. to say I was dead, and we worked that one out. But the other one was another night. The hotel caught fire, and I came back to the hotel we were staying in, which was on fire. And John Ince was running up and down the corridor saying, "Look at all these stupid people. The hotel's on fire and they're not getting out." But John, you're not getting out either. You know, you're here in the corridor. Why? Anyway, by the time we were prepared to leave, the fire had gone out, so it really wasn't much of an issue anymore. But amazing man. I mean, but a bad skier. Because he. Oh, that's another point. He and I got in a ski lift and we went up this mountain in the ski resort, and French people shouted at us and we didn't know what they were saying. You know, you sit in a sort of bench thing on a couple of wires and you go up a hill, you get to the top and there's this huge slope, which if you're wearing skis, I assume you get out of this bench thing on the wire and you ski down the slope and carry on down the hill. But seeing neither of us were wearing skis, there was no elegant way down the slope but to go down on our backsides. I think it must have been, and that's what these French people had been shouting at us on the way up. You know, whatever it is for French for you need skis if you're going to go down the slope. But it wouldn't have helped anyway because you couldn't get off once you were in the air. So. But I did see him come whizzing down the hill tremendously fast, leaning backwards at about, it's not 90 degrees, but maybe sort of 130 degrees or something, waving these sticks you have. And he missed, because there was a bridge. On either side of the bridge, a massive snowdrift, and he missed the bridge by, half a meter and just disappeared into the snowdrift between the bridge and the hillside, which, if you hit the bridge, bad news. Anyway, yes, that John Ince telling my mother I was dead was not. She didn't seem too surprised though when I knocked on her door and said, "Here I am, hello," and she said, "John Ince just told me you're dead." I said, "No, here. I am." Anyway, yeah, my mother and I went on a skiing holiday. We actually owned a skiing apartment flat thing in La Plagne in France. So we went to stay there. Right? We didn't do a lot of skiing actually, a lot of more après ski than actual ski. Yeah, no, it was a fabulous time, and he John Abe is just such an amazing human being. Like so sad when he died.
And Louis?
Well, Louis was a much more staid and solid person. Yeah, he was just, I don't know, he wasn't quite as weird as John, I suppose. He was just a great teacher. I mean, cared about his people. Still does. I assume he's retired now. I think he was headmaster of Paul Boys High or something. I did go and see him probably 15 years ago. It was exactly the same. I saw the videos of When the Saints again from last year, because I also get invited to the other 50-year matric graduation, even though I wasn't actually there at the time. I went to the 25-year, right? Sadly, I was very rude to Doug Brown, but might have also, he probably deserved it. I mean, Doug made my life at SACS High School something of a misery. I mean, I had my own insecurities and things. And if anybody really worked on them like nobody else, that was done. And I did get my revenge, and it's a terrible story, and it's not one I'm proud of, but it was done with forethought and malice. That I was being picked up after school, as I sometimes was, by my father's car, and Doug said to me, "You've got to stay here for another hour and a half or something." And I said, "But Mr. Brown, my chauffeur is waiting for me," which I knew at the time was designed to just really get the blood from under his nails. And it did. And it did. And not only did it, but John Innes spoke to me about it much later and saying, "Stephen, that really was not something you should have said to Doug Brown." And I said, "John, I did that just to piss him off because he'd made my life such a misery." So I'm not proud of it. It's a terrible thing to say. You don't say my chauffeur is waiting for me. I mean, it really does sound like crap. But it was the case, and it really annoyed him. So hooray.
In what way did he make your life a misery?
Oh, Jesus, as you said earlier, I wanted to grow my hair long. I wanted to be a bit cool. And Doug was just someone who would not give an inch. Christ, I remember he would walk around the assembly hall. He'd say, "I can smell hair, hair lacquer." And he would go from student to student to see who was wearing hair lacquer that glued their hair together so it didn't look as long as it was. Yeah, you, yeah, and me and others. I mean, because we wanted Jesus to be a slightly cool, and he just couldn't have that. He just wanted to put us down over and over and over. And yet, I don't think he was a bad guy. I think when SACS went multiracial, he went out and he found black students and he brought them in, and I take my hat off to that. But he didn't treat us all with great kindness, and I take that very badly. Because we had the whole scala, didn't we? Every type of teacher. We had the real assholes, and we had the most fantastic people. Everything in between. All right, and Doug had very good sides and very bad sides, as far as I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
You remember you got sent down Dean Street. You had your hair cut for 5 cents or something by the butcher, shaved your head. The last little bit, the last illusion you had of your own coolness was finally just torn out from underneath. And that's a bad thing, if we were all weak, we all had our problems and foibles and embarrassments, and some of the teachers just really worked on those. I mean, Christ, you remember Oosthuizen from the junior school? Jesus, that was a sadist. If there's someone who really made my junior school a misery, it was Oosthuizen. I'm sorry, I now speak Dutch. I give it the wrong pronunciation. And the the woodwork teacher, what was his name? Van Niekerk. He came to me a few times from Niekerk, and he really enjoyed that. No, I think these days, you go to school in Holland, the teacher puts a hand on you, he loses his job. So getting beaten, having rulers broken on our hands in junior school at the age of 12, man, you'd go to jail for that.
What effect did that have on you at the time?
Any weaknesses I had, any embarrassments were just so magnified. I mean, for no reason whatsoever, my desk in junior school was full of bits of shit I found around school grounds, spark plugs and bits of wire and a button and things like that. And half my desk was just full of all that. And Oosthuizen found this out one day, and he pulled me up to the front of the class, and he took these things out one by one and threw them to the front of the class, just to embarrass me, just to belittle. And it worked. I was embarrassed and belittled. Jesus. Anyway, high school, I don't think there was anyone like that. I think, I think Doug was very keen on discipline, and everyone has to be obeying the rules. Didn't like that, but it was nothing in comparison with some of the people in the juniors. Even Warner was a family friend, but he blew it at a given stage. But he died a couple of years ago. I think if you're going to be a school teacher, think why. Are you there to help people and make their lives easier, or are you there to bully them and drive them into the ground? And we had everybody. We had the whole. And the junior school was bad, really bad. And I know you had a rough time at boarding school in the junior with the same people. But no, high school, most of the teachers fabulous. Looking back on them, the Terry Marshes and all the others, Jesus, great people, really, really got us going, got us on the right. Even though a lot of people left and went to all the other schools, as you said, and we were left with 3 matric classes. I don't know why. I think they couldn't deal with it. It wasn't the educational system at SACS, which was fantastic. It was their own inabilities or impatience and not repeat a year at 9, and go back to Cape Tech and get it done within a year, and then not so much in education as getting the right documentation. We used to go with him riding down Dean Street, standing on the back of his wheelchair, and he would control it in the way. It's quite terrifying. I would always wondered if he'd ever managed to learn to walk again, because if you held him up, he could move his legs. Jesus. Doesn't get much tougher than that. Well, I went for 2 very unsuccessful years at UCT. And I wanted to ask you, Colin Nugent, was he at SACS? Because surely he was my next door neighbor in residence at Leo Mark. I didn't realize he was at SACS. How can I not have known he was at SACS?
You finish matric, you go to London to see your family, and then you come back at the beginning of first year. And you go to Leo Marquardt. And
right.
And you did electrical engineering.
No, actually, I stayed with E. McNaught first. Second year, I went to Leo Mark, and then I blew it. I terrible results both years.
Why was that?
Went back to the UK. Huh?
Why?
Sex, drugs, rock and roll. Probably. I wasn't a very good student. No, I went to the Central London Poly after for a year, and did even worse, if that was at all possible. That's when I came back to South Africa, and I, as a favor, and this is in inverted, I was put in the January intake up to Potchefstroom for the SADF, where I planned to cut my hair because it was down to my elbows. I did not arrive in the format that was appreciated by the SADF. I remember I was rejected medically. They said you have an overactive thyroid because I weighed 50 kilos. I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes. If I inhaled and they measured my chest measurement, it actually didn't change at all. Pulse rate was in rest above 100. I was in atrocious conditions, sweating like, it was 40 degrees in the shade there. But anyway, they said, look, we're going to send you out. You come back in a year after you've recovered from overactive thyroid, which 4 doctors and the military nurse said. And at that moment, they said, okay, he's not allowed to do anything anymore. So anywhere I went, I walked around the military camp with my hair down to my elbows and 6 people behind me carrying my, because I wasn't allowed to pick anything up. And during the day, they sent me off to the officers' mess where I was told to sit in a corner, and people would come in and they would look at me and think, Christ, what's this guy doing here in Afrikaans? My Afrikaans isn't very good, but I do speak fluent Dutch now, as you know. Okay, my Afrikaans. What doet hij hier? And one guy even came in, he looked at me, he said, what are you doing here? And I said, they told me to stay here. And he looked at my head and he said, is he a communist? And I said, no, I'm not. He said, when you find God, you'll be okay. Anyway, so that's when they said to me, where do you live? And I said, London. They said, we're not giving you a ticket back to London. Where else do you live? I said, Cape Town. They said, okay, there's a train leaving in 8 days. And I thought, I'm not going to be here for 8 days. So I said, what about Joburg? They said, well, what's in Joburg? I said, I have a cousin there. They said, fine, we'll give you a ticket to Joburg. So 2 days later, standing on the station in Potchefstroom, waiting for a train to Joburg. And just so happy. I've been chucked out of the army. You cannot believe, because I know you didn't go to the army, but I unintentionally. And the guy next to me had arrived. He was a real Platelander. God knows what kind of farm he came from, but he was wearing a absolute, black suit and white shirt and a black tie and pants, and really looked like he was going to a funeral, except someone had stolen his shoes. So he was barefoot, standing in the suit and tie on the railway station. And he was in tears because he'd been thrown out of the army. And I'm like, no, I got thrown out of the army. And I went back, I went to Joburg. I stayed there for a week or two with my cousin. And then I hitched down to Cape Town. And I went to visit an old family friend, Marcel Coy. She was a lecturer in economic history at UCT. I went to see her and I said, oh, this is the story. I was thrown out of the army. And she said, why did you come back and go to the army? And I said, I don't know, isn't that what one does? You go to the army. And she said, no. She said, don't you feel the anger in the townships and the people and the injustice? And it was the first time ever that someone in South Africa, who wasn't a complete muppet, said to me, you don't have to follow this. You don't have to go to the army. You don't have to kill black people in order to promote apartheid for everyone. And that was the moment that I thought, well, why am I going to the army then? We were so brainwashed in so many ways. I mean, you to a lesser degree because you buggered off earlier and got out of it more elegantly than I did. And that's when I thought, fuck it, I have to leave South Africa now. I'm not going to go to jail. I'm not going to make an amazing statement, which is completely pointless, but go to jail for it. I'm not going to go to the army. And that's when I said, okay, something else. And that's when I went to Israel, went to a kibbutz, et cetera, et cetera. So this is my aha erlebnis, my, what's it called? There's a good English word when you have the sudden realization that life is different. You don't have to follow the path which has been set out for you by looking back on it after 50 years. People who were sadly misdirected. Be a man, go to the army, fight for your country. In retrospect, I am so pleased I did not go and defend the apartheid government. When you look back at the SS and the Nazis now in the Second World War, you don't look back at them with much respect. And I think looking back on the way that the SADF defended apartheid South Africa, I mean, and so many good people we know did, even though that was not their belief, primarily belief. Why? We were brainwashed. We still are. Everyone's still brainwashed. But I mean, we were badly brainwashed as kids and teenagers in South Africa. You were lucky to break out of that. I was broke. I had no education, no job, no prospects, and kibbutz was a great place to go. And an old family friend of ours, Oscar van Leer, who was Jewish and huge multinational owner, friend of my father's through Shell, he said, I'll get you a position in a kibbutz and you can get used to Israel and then you can probably go and get a job at the Technique because you're a technical guy, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's where I met Alice and I followed her to the Netherlands, which is probably better than having ended up in Israel for me, in my case. And certainly now, Israel is a pretty rough place to be. I mean, I would also always support Israel, but they do some pretty terrible things. But it would be a lot worse if they weren't Israelis, Anyway, that's
so you go
discussion we really don't want to get in.
Yeah. So you meet Alice and then you go back to Holland.
Right.
What happened?
Right. Got to Holland, went to Groningen, up in the north. Presence of mind to be able to finally start for the third time electrical engineering at a polytechnic. This time it worked. Got a job with Philips, and after a few years working in the Netherlands, I got sent out to China and Vietnam, Thailand, a number of other places, and most recently to Lesotho, back to Lesotho, where I set up a Philips factory, which was there for a few years, but a couple of years after I left, it was no longer working very well, so they closed it down again. And in fact, Philips themselves have closed almost everything in the last 5 years. I mean, they've gone. When I started with Philips, I think it was 340,000 people. I don't think they've got 60,000 left. So they've just dropped another 11,000 last month around the world. So I wouldn't buy shares in Philips.
So when you were, deployed to China and Vietnam and Lesotho, your mission was to go and find and build a factory.
Either build a factory or do a turnaround for an existing factory which wasn't running very well.
So could you just you responded to my question there. Could you just sort of talk about that? What like without responding to me, just say so describe what you would do in Asia and Africa.
Well, I think one reason I got sent out is obviously because my English is my first language, and that was very useful even for the Dutch, who speak mostly very good English. And I was an engineer, so that helped a lot. Later, I got sent out as a plant manager, so the guy in charge of a whole factory or whatever. And that worked pretty well. It's amazing how easy it is to find the low-hanging fruit in what is basically a fairly simple factory. I mean, this was all lighting. This wasn't rocket surgery. This was just making light bulbs or fluorescent tubes. Quite easy to find ways of improving production and efficiency and looking after. I mean, the great thing is, I think, I don't know if having grown up in South Africa made a difference here, but I saw that a lot of people who were sent out as expats for short term, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, they become extremely colonial. I'm the white master. I mean, it sounds terrible, but that is a very easy trap to fall into. And of course, I'd grown up as that and rejected it. So I think if you show respect for whoever it is you work with, wherever they come from, that makes an enormous difference to how you can progress in any industry at all, in any country at all. And after Philips, because I finally left Philips about 14, 15 years ago, and we started up our own business, African Clean Energy. And I've just come back from 3 months in Uganda, setting up a new factory there. I've been back for just over a week now. And they're people like everywhere else. You treat them with respect, and you treat them properly, and you treat them fairly, and the results tend to be good. And that applies to Vietnam. That applies to China, wherever you go. And that worked. So in general, the factories I took over or started up from greenfield worked pretty well. So yeah, I think I look back on my career with Philips with some pride and pleasure. Not all of it, there were a few assholes on the way, but in general, and of course, as surely all of us must at this stage in our lives, I got my pension 2 years ago, I think, and I retired to the north of the Netherlands, Groningen, where you visited me 45 years ago, and I hope you're going to visit us again. Well, African Clean Energy grew out of a Philips product, because as my contract was nearing an end in Maseru, the salespeople in Johannesburg from Philips said to me, "Hey, some guy gave me this wood stove, which was developed in Eindhoven by a very clever guy I know, but he developed it and made it, and it was made in India for a while." And what it is, it's a stove which uses about 2/3 less biomass, which means wood or charcoal, whatever it is you're burning, and burns without smoke. And you look at the WHO, their figures say 4.2 million people die every year from smoke inhalation. It's mostly women and children. Very nasty. That's more than AIDS and malaria and pneumonia together. And no one's ever heard of it, but it still kills over 4 million a year. And the guys at Philips said, "See if you can sell this in Lesotho, because I'm not interested in doing it in South Africa." So I went back to Lesotho, and people were very interested, and we started making them for Philips as a sort of Philips joint venture. And they were very popular, and a lot of them got sold, and they work very well. And then it's not really Philips' core business. And so Philips, for various reasons, said, "We're not going to make these anymore." So I took over the principle, and I made one which does not infringe on any patents held by Philips. So, I mean, it's not a very difficult thing to make, and it's not a very hugely scientific problem to make them. It's just, it's made out of some slices of brick with a few holes in them, and you stick it in the right body with a fan and a battery, and it works. I mean, you can look on the website www.africancleanenergy.com, gives you all the information you might want to know. So we started making our own in Lesotho, and when Philips pulled out, we kept the factory and we made our own model. And then my second son, Daniel, started making them in Cambodia, where they're doing very, very well indeed. And last year, we decided we would also put a factory into Uganda. So that's what I've been doing for the last few months with Alice, putting a factory up in Uganda. Daniel went there first. He got it going for a month, and then we went for another 3 months, and we got it running smoothly. And they're now running on their own. Not bad. Yeah, it's going to take a bit of tweaking, but it'll be fine. And with a bit of luck, we'll put another one in Kenya next year, or this year, or somewhere else, because they're quite easy factories to build, and it's a product everybody wants. And each one of these stoves, looking at what you call a base level, saves about 4 tons of CO2 output a year. So we made 100,000 of these things. That's 400,000 tons of CO2 a year, and growing. And every year, of course, because the stove doesn't work for 1 year, it works every year. So we've saved in the last 10 years, I don't know, it's in the millions of tons of CO2. And if you reckon that your car produces about 6 tons of CO2 per year, and one of our stoves saves 4, well, this is making quite an impact into climate change and global warming. So if we can make 1 million a year, well, you're really looking at serious differences to the change in climate. And the market is, just to give you a couple of numbers, half the world's population cooks on biomass. Divide by 5 to get how many families that is. You're looking at 800 million stoves would be needed. And we can make 100,000 a year. So it's going to take us a while to get to 800 million. But the market is there. Well, you could actually stop deforestation if everyone used these stoves instead of charcoal. It would just end deforestation tomorrow. But we'd have to make 800 million of them, so it's going to take a while. It's not very sexy, because if you talk about people dying, then when people die en masse, like now in Turkey, or in plane crashes or whatever, there's something to put in the newspaper. But the 4+ million people per year who die of respiratory problems are spread over the whole world. So it's not like, oh my God, all these people have suddenly died. It's a very slow ongoing process. So it doesn't make the papers. It doesn't make people feel bad, even though, if you look at things like AIDS, I mean, again, this probably contradicts what I'm saying, but AIDS is a big problem. Money is poured into AIDS and stopping people from getting AIDS. And yet, how many people die of AIDS every year? It's, I don't know, 1-2 million. It's significant, but it's not over the 4 like it is from breathing in smoke, because you're cooking on biomass. But it somehow doesn't make people's imagination. In some cases, it does. Sometimes you've got groups or institutions who say, hey, this is a fantastic thing, and they will really, really support it. But there's also a commercial problem. If these things cost money to make, so we've got to get the money, which in the past has been my money. I mean, it hasn't been that much. You buy the stuff, you make the stove, you sell them, you get some money back, you make more stoves. It's just an ordinary business. And if you want to make millions of them, and they cost $100 to make, then you're looking at $100 million. Now, I don't have $100 million on me. So it starts much smaller, and you hope it grows, and you hope that people will see it, that governments will say, hey, this is something you really have to work on. But there's possibilities like carbon credits and things like that, where you can boost the earnings and then pour that back into the company. But you still got to make a shitload of these things. As I said, the market is probably 800 million. And these things last 5 to 10 years. So the market will renew itself until everybody's on solar power and LPG and all the good things that will eventually work. But for the next 30 years, if you want to stop deforestation and this many people dying, you need a product like ours. And there's probably only a handful of people making these on the planet, and we are probably one of the best.
How long did it take you to set up African Clean Energy from the beginning in Lesotho? How long was it? How long did you have to basically lift it up by its bootstraps yourself?
About a year and a half.
Yeah.
And it's still ongoing today. I was sent out to Uganda by my children who are running the company, because I'm cheap. I don't get paid. I just go there and I do it. That's fine, you know. But if you, I mean, take the war in the Ukraine, which is just a massive tragedy. How much is in the newspapers now? You know, it's page 2 now, and it's still ongoing. Now we've got the Syria-Turkey earthquake. So far, what is it? 12, 14,000 people dead. 2 weeks from now, it's going to be page 2 again. And things like respiratory problems, dying from that or dying from AIDS or whatever. How long can you keep getting excited about it? AIDS has been going on for what, 35 years? Well, it's also basically been cured. I mean, if you've got the drugs, so it isn't such an issue anymore. But you know, how long can you keep the attention of the public for a particular disaster before the next disaster happens, or they just get bored with it? Because news is money. If you're not making money selling the news, then you're going to find other news that does sell. Well, my children took it on themselves to do this. I always thought I could walk away from it after 10 years, and they didn't. And Reuben's managed to raise fairly significant capital to make it keep going. Daniel decided he preferred running a factory to being a food and beverage manager in expensive hotels. So that's what he's doing. And Judith, who is actually in Masiru at the moment, doing a check on the factory there, is our chief of operations, and decided that's what she wanted to do, which is now my hands are absolutely tied because all 3 of my children's futures depend on this company, which I'm no longer running. So, you know, but it certainly worries me, but they seem to be doing okay. Reuben is in Switzerland at the moment at the, what is it? The Global World Economic Forum. He was invited to be there. So they're doing okay. And in terms of recognition, what's the B Corp? You know what a B Corp is? No, it's a form of recognition of when you have a company that is looking after its people, is for a good reason, it has something worth doing, transparency, things like that. B Corp, it's global. I mean, you've got them all over the whole world. And I don't know how many B Corp companies there are, but it's certainly going to be in the thousands or tens of thousands. We are the highest scoring in Europe, which is, you know, almost Nobel Prize kind of stuff. Even though it's an ongoing, never-ending struggle. Well, I did business, always is. You did business for years. It's a never-ending struggle. It's not like you get somewhere and say, "Oh, thank God for that. Now I can go home," and that doesn't happen.
You haven't this actually.
So, just Reuben took this. He turned it into a multinational from what was just a business in Lesotho. And well, it's a very small multinational. We have only 3 factories, but I mean, the headquarters are in Amsterdam, and we have sales offices in a number of countries. So, and it's looking as if it can fly. I just don't want to get too excited about it at my age. But it could really take off, or it could just fizzle out. As any business, we were talking about Philips. Philips is fizzling out. How long does a business last? I forget what the statistic is, but I mean, what is it? 14 years or something is the average time that any business lasts. Philips was 130. Unless, of course, you can make a lot of money out of energy, like BP, Shell, Exxon. They've all just declared the largest profits they've made in the history of their company, while we're all forking out absurd amounts for energy, electricity, gas, petrol. I mean, Americans were bitching because it went up to how many dollars a gallon? It was twice that in Holland. So when Shell come in and say, hey, great news, guys, we've just made the biggest profit in the history of Shell. Yeah, I think quite a lot of that came from me. Says everybody. I mean, anyway, yeah. Wow. Well, it's a toss-up, you know, because they're quite expensive. They cost a lot to make. They got lithium batteries in them and expensive electronics and all sorts of stuff. So the people we're selling to can't afford to buy them, which is why we do extended credit terms. You get the stove and you pay it off over a number of months. It's actually cheaper to buy one than to not buy one in terms of fuel consumption. People, your energy consumption is probably 70-80% thermal, and the rest is a bit of light, bit of music, but most of it is heating, cooking, is where you are. and you don't get there using solar energy and PV panels, because the number of batteries you need and the number of PV, if you wanted to boil an egg, are just absurd. Fine for lighting, you know, you've got LEDs and things like that. PC charge your phone. That takes a lot of energy. If you're going to buy batteries to cook on, you'd be looking at $15,000 worth of batteries. Now, someone up the mountain in Lesotho doesn't have 15,000 induction plate. That's why these things are going to be around. Ideally, in 20, 30 years, everyone will be cooking on solar energy and doesn't kill you. Take a long time. So this is hopefully eventually be redundant, but it's a while. And if we take too long to do, and I've been to Malawi and I've been to Uganda and I've been to other countries where trees are being chopped down. I mean, you go to the Sudan, where trees to ship to other countries so they can cook. And then, you know, then we're going to be looking at very seriously. We all know what global warming is doing, CO2 into the atmosphere, that all up. Yeah. Nasty situation.